You mentioned the difficulty in measuring just recently with your surveys. A lot of the movie, your comments are directed through the lens of an economist, obviously, in speaking about wealth creation and net worth of individuals through very quantifiable kinds of means. And it's interesting to hear how this is done through kinship networks and community relations. I'm interested, however, a little bit on the flip side of that, the ways in which these kind of non-quantifiable outcomes are influenced, influence the quality of life of individuals, families, communities. And I understand that this is hard to measure, and it might be more observations than anything. But if you could speak to that, I think it would be very interesting.
Non-quantifiable. So it's almost by definition not something I could ask a question about in the survey, right?
More or less. If you think of yourself more of an anthropologist than an economist, perhaps.
Oh, another setup question. Well, I think you could see it in the film but it is complemented with the measurement that we did. If you just ask these households, and it took us a while to figure this out, you know, do you help each other? And they would say, yeah, we're all brothers and sisters together. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they're actually, you know, family related, but they meant that as a statement of support. They think of their life that way, as having close friends and indeed relatives around within the village. But you might think that was just, you know, so we're in Boston, we support Boston, Boston strong, you know, something like that. But it actually shows up in the data. So the stories they're saying about how they view one another, it's actually, I'm not answering your questions, I'm basically saying we did manage to quantify their social capital, as it were.
So in the film, there's the woman that raises silkworms, and she says that all 3 of her children have moved to Bangkok or other cities. So I'm just wondering, do you see a lot more people now moving out of the villages? And if so, how has that affected the communities or the data?
Yeah, actually, the age of the typical respondent was getting older and older. It's Thai Family Research Project, but even the enumerators are getting older and older. The enumerators marry each other and they have babies, and likewise in the village. So, you know, the median age of the nominal head of the household was not young when we began 15 years ago, but many of them are done, you know, with their active working years and their productive years. Well, a couple of comments. First of all, remittances and gifts are still huge in Thailand, and particularly in the Northeast. That's the big source of kind of the life cycle. In the central area, it's more traditional accumulating financial assets and then spending them down as you age. And in the Northeast, it's more like, in economics jargon, overlapping generations where the young support the elderly, and increasingly so as not just when they get old, but as they increase in age, there's more and more gifts coming in. The younger kids have moved back. It's still true that Bangkok is the big metropolitan area, but the towns, you know, have turned into modest-sized cities in the provinces, and I understand this is also going on in India now. There's this sort of increasing urbanization. We weren't totally aware of it at first until, you know, we heard stories that the kids of this household were not in the village, but they were nearby. So I think that's an increasing pattern, that they're in the province, they're in the main city in the province, they're working there, but it's a bit easier to get home. Having said all of that, I do worry quite a bit that the Northeasterners are still relying on this kinship support as they age, and typically in heavily industrialized societies, the elderly get vulnerable, and elderly without kids or have kids who aren't supporting them can really suffer in their old age. So I do hope this traditional system continues. The evidence from other countries is that it may deteriorate and better, and someone asked earlier, I guess the first question, sort of what do we imagine might be helpful? Well, better sort of financial planning, kind of thinking about the things they can do outside of their traditional system, making them more aware of financial instruments that are actually there now. They're not new, but they're not used to using them. So that might help get ahead of this problem if it does develop.
In all the years that you've been looking at this informal lending among networks, have you ever had situations where lenders sort of went rogue and either charged absurdly high interest rates, or in the event of a default, came and did something really violent or terrible? I mean, what happens when you do default? Do you just get cut off and don't get gifts and don't get invited to people's weddings, or are there really violent, drastic consequences?
There can be violent consequences. When I was, doing that field research in the north, we were in a village where after a day the elders confided in us that the headman's wife had basically taken all the rice in the rice bank and wasn't going to return it, and that the headman himself was drinking a whole lot, and they all have guns up there. So we got a bit worried ourselves, although we didn't actually, see anything happen. Thailand put in a big reservoir in part of the country, and the government provided money to compensate the households, and typically, that money would flow into the village via the headman. And I was told, so this is a little bit of hearsay, that in one of those villages the headman did not distribute the money, and they did kill him. Now, I don't think normally, you have violent events like that, but social sanctions, getting ostracized, can be an effective threat. I couldn't quite hear you when you said, was it the lender who defaulted or the borrowers who couldn't repay?
The borrowers defaulted. Yeah, if the borrower couldn't repay, if the lender show up and take your kid and make them work on his field, or beat you up, or
So I've certainly heard those things in other countries, and I've heard stories about gangs in urban areas that operate like that in Thailand. In the villages, I've never seen anything like that actually happening. But remember, everyone knows there's a lot of risk in the environment, and there are many good reasons to not be able to pay off a loan. Part of those high rates is a bit like an insurance premium. The lender, is trying to make money, but needs to cover the households that don't repay. So there is an issue of higher rates, certainly for the money lenders, but it's actually hard to find the stereotypical money lenders in our data. We look for them. We'd expect to see all these transactions going from many people exactly to the hub of the wheel. But I think in practice, it's all clouded over with this massive kind of other kinds of borrowing and lending, including among family at low interest, and some higher interest rate loans, even among family. there is a massive village money market. I mean, people talk about, in the U.S., about shadow banking, and this comes up with respect to Dodd-Frank and regulation and so on. Well, in Thailand, the shadow banking basically are all of these informal transactions that link households together, and it's literally hundreds of thousands of dollars converted from Thai baht, flowing around within the village, depending on who's having a bad year and who needs to pay off formal loans and so on. So it's rarely sort of a stereotypical picture of a single moneylender dealing with all the households.